We continue Al-Kafi, Volume 6, the discussion thereof, with a section on animals. 11,003 regards that a person can eat a fish or something that jumps out of the canal if they catch it before it dies. If they, don't catch that happened, just find some dead fish on the shore, that's different. They shouldn't eat that. 11,033, the black-colored birds shouldn't be killed. Now, some of them are predators, and that's why you don't eat them. Don't kill a bird that you can't eat. That's the most obvious. Or they're scavengers or something. You can tell by their type of beak. You can tell by their, do they have talons and that sort of thing. But the crow and the raven remind people of a couple phrases. One of them's, all praise be to God, cherisher of the realms, and others, and not of the straying. 11,044 and 11,047 says that slaughtering animals should be done with metal, a sharpened metal knife for a single quick cut. If there's an emergency, then, something like stone or something's better. We're not stabbing them with reeds and pointy sticks, if we can help that. Now we can launch arrows and stuff, but that's a little bit different. 11,122 mentions how it's not liked to use things that are poisonous for food. So when people talk about some of these stinging and whatnot creatures, it's not per se that they're forbidden because they're outside of the 5 things that a Muslim doesn't consume except for survival. Because that's a pretty set list. It's that it's not. It's forbidden on another way because of the harmful effects. You don't do anything that's going to cause your death, and if there's a significant, if there's like a percentage chance of anything, then yeah, no. And then there's the stupid things that people like. They eat so much of an herb or something like that that's like a ridiculous amount, and maybe it combines with medication, which makes it deadly on a much smaller dosage. So, yeah, know what you're doing when you consume things. If you're starving to death, you got to do what you got to do. 11,134 talks about eating the birds with gizzards and the sorts of eggs that they would lay. If it's a totally round egg, this is not the sort of egg that one should have. It's, the ones that are different at the ends, like chicken and duck and that sort of thing. The Quran says that the earth is like one of these eggs that are round, but kind of like flattened in the middle, so not a perfect sphere, which is actually the shape of the world. So, all this flat earth stuff that people hear about, that's not supported by Islam. There is a weak narration in one of these books that it's always the companions of the companions of the companions ones that have some of the oddest things. But it's not a narration attributed to the Prophet. It's a narration attributed to one of the imams was having a discussion that this is what the scholars say. See, it's what the scholars say. It wasn't what came through revelation. Because they're claiming that the world was on the back of a whale, which was on the back of water, which was on the back of a rock, which was the back of a bull with a weirdly gliding bull with a horn, which was on top of moisture, and what the moisture was on people, then it got into disagreement. So this was just one of those ancient Persian myths. Although maybe something about the words back in the day indicated something a little more related to forces of nature or something. Because the bull, well, there was the sun bull and the moon bull mythology. But back to that narration, the eating of the birds that flap their wings in flight rather than the ones that glide about and like the buzzards and the eagles and that sort of thing. The ones that fly like that, no. 11,148 to 11,156. 65 says that you don't eat the animal that has become intoxicated until it's not intoxicated. So, well, you don't slaughter it in the condition where the alcohol or whatever is going through its running through its veins. Different waiting periods for animals that have consumed feces, or who eats particularly among the feces. I know there's the animal folds, there's feces, but you know what I mean, because that happens with some animals. 11,180 says that you don't use the milk of, nor the meat of the animal that was involved in bestiality. So the sacrifices in India later on were stopped from that teaching alone. Now, not all the sacrifices involved bestiality, but a lot of them. And when I made that one video on Proshmedda, and comments related to the matters that book talks about, obviously from reading thousands of pages of other material too, went into that. Yeah. Now, now the reaction isn't as extreme as the biblical reaction. The biblical reaction, you kill everybody involved. But again, 11,201 to 11,207 regards the eating of the clay. It's a source of hypocrisy. It leads to one's own murder. The funeral prayer is not prayed over anybody unless it's the graveyard dirt of Hussein. Well, they really don't know where that grave is, so it's a really big area comparatively. Between 11,059 and 60 is omitted. So that would be Hadith chapter 4, Hadith 3 to chapter 5, 4. $11,087 to $11,097 lets us know that, that a child should grow, at least the last narration lets us know that 5 spans of the hand is what a child should grow at the very least before the food it uses is for slaughter. And the first narration in the sequence lets us know that we shouldn't be slaughtering before the dawn. Now, I guess we can hunt at night, but again, finding sleeping animals in their net, that's different. Unless it's a standing one in the field, you don't go up and get the birds in the nest and all that. The people with sectarian problems, what they've slaughtered, like the Harauri and the Murjia and the pottery and that sort of thing. And we know if it's from a Muslim, unless you know otherwise, just you got to presume that it was slaughtered, right? Now nowadays, when I ask how things were raised, because there's issues with the raising, even my own health, that's, so on a couple issues, both the raising nowadays can be haram, and the, with the drugs and the way the animal is treated, not just picking up an animal on auction and slaughtering it, that's, to be avoided at the very least. So I don't take part in it unless the whole process is halal. And so, so women and children and, the insane, it's okay to eat what's been slaughtered by them. It's okay to eat what's been slaughtered by the castrated people, if it's slaughtered properly, and if it's needed for them to do such, and they, slaughter in the name of God. Narration 11,115 gives reasons to have faith in the prohibitions. Reminds us that of the people who eat the carrion are people who weaken. They die earlier, they die suddenly. It's not something to be done for those reasons. The consumption of blood leads to moral, mental, emotional, smell, and fluid-related problems. Wine, and if I recall right, it's the same word used in the Quran that refers to all intoxicants. It can take away reason. Like, even caffeine does that to a degree, because it reduces restraint. The reduction of blood flow to the brain can cause some issues there. Certainly the jolt, people, even avid advocators of caffeine for energy and that sort of thing, are skipping over the fact that even they themselves have less energy, less ability to pay attention and stay still and that sort of thing. Certainly the greater intoxicants have effects like that. And the eating of the khanzir, best known as the swine, but it also includes the predatory beast that fly, and the ones that crawl on the ground, and the bears and all that sort of stuff. You can tell by their teeth and their nails and beaks and that sort of thing. It's like a kind of cannibalism, and some of the cruelty could be said to pass on between them. 11,077 reminds us that we can use the animals that are stillborn if they've been developing properly. If they're disformed and rotten and that sort of thing, no. 11,055 to 11,066 reminds us that we don't cut the spinal cord, so we're not beheading animals, unless that's accidental. Hence, certain people have to know what they are doing and be firm about it. And we don't have the animals watch each other. When you're hunting, that's a little different, but you take the animals apart from each other, and you don't you don't give the animal preliminary cuts. You don't remove part of its skin or that sort of thing. No. But you do mention the name of God. And sometimes the animals will resist, but you don't, if you have to use a sword or a spear, that's fine. But you don't beat them down. And when you find an animal and it's still moving, then it can be slaughtered. So, and anything done in emergency, if it's a part that's not supposed to be used in slaughter or that sort of thing, then that can be done in the case of an emergency. 11,215 says that the gold utensils are, and the silver utensils are ones that don't have the certainty that others do as far as their legal status. Well, certainly the values of gold and silver, particularly nowadays, shift a lot. They've shifted slower back in the day, but they still shifted. So, unless you're dividing portions of silver and saying, and when it comes to the food, the plants, and all that stuff that's going to be mentioned here, I'm not saying to replace medicine or to replace technology. This is just part of the technology, because obviously the medicines were derived from, some of them are just extracts from plants. Some are treated plants. So, I'm not saying whatever, but, regard the current medical information. So 11,234 says that we don't eat leaning forward or backwards. And the next narration says that the leaning on the hand is permissible. 11,245 lets us know that it's permissible to eat while walking. Muhammad is an example of those who ate while walking. 11,279 encourages being unique in preparing food and inviting one's friends to it. 11,307 talks about the replacing of the earth with a purified bread on which people will eat until their accounting is complete. But it talks about the people of the hellfire. And the people of the hellfire, if they ask to eat or drink, they will, be given the rot. They will giving a boiling fluid that what boiling fluid would do to individuals. And not only is it the boiling fluid, it's like the fluid of a dirty fornicator, that sort of thing. Other narrations make that clearer what's being talked about there, but that's how unpleasant it would be. 11,324 tells us that at night we should have maybe a morsel, maybe a sip of water, but there's a part of us that if we have nothing whatsoever at night, that it is as a vein called dusk that preys against us. So certainly our body has the right that we consume something. Now, some people, it's not good for them to have a full meal, and again, these are ethical, spiritual guidelines to be combined with medical information. 11,342 reminds us that we mention God with all the food. Now, if we forget and mention later, Satan or the devils could throw up how they took part in the meal, through the forgetfulness, and, condemn the person who has said such things. As in the devil will treat it like it's not sufficient. Now, you could say the devil takes part through his minions, that sort of thing would be going on. 11, and it's like dreams. If you involve God, the remembrance of God and that sort of stuff when going to sleep, well, then that closes some doors. Eating and some other things are of that regard. 11,382 talks of the ritual in regards to a new home. And so when building a new home, slaughtering a healthy ram and distributing meat to the poor, and praying that the rebellious of the humans and the fire beings be kept away, and the shayateen min al jinn in general. Notice how elsewhere we have the idea that shayateen is not all the jinn are shayateen, and humans can become shayateen. So, you gotta, it's not the regular T. I think I said that wrong, but 11,300. You're praying that these are kept away. 11,394 reminds us to treat bread in special regard. Of course, back in the time of Daniel, we didn't have the bleached bread and transformed and all that other stuff that people do to it, and we're obviously talking about the halal bread that hasn't been cooked with the alcoholic drug or unlawful meat-related ingredients. But Daniel prayed that the earth and the land was hardened like pottery because of the lack of rain, and people were eating each other and that sort of thing. So the biblical Daniel's like sort of could be said to be an amalgam of figures. So some of what we mean by one prophet or another is not really applicable in that sense. 11,412 tells us that roasted flour, the stuff prepared with that, I guess, was initially prepared by means of revelation. 11,431 mentions that chief among foods is meat. 11,475 talks about how the sauce of the prophets was a combination of meat and milk. Now, most people can't properly digest milk proteins. So it's not saying that it's required to consume milk. And a lot of this artificial milk is not good for a person either, so let's not... we put more chalk into it, so it has more calcium than milk. It's like, okay, and it's more observant than... Okay, but sometimes they have some additive. But anyways, 11... Or they have the wrong vitamin D, or something. I mean, the FDA has approved of it. I'm not saying that it doesn't, that... 11,508 says that we should wait till food cools, and the steaming hot food as such loses its blessing and Satan takes part. 11,522 talks about how a kebab with fish and salt and water, that sort of stuff, should be after cupping and other such medical procedures that use blood. That's the practice. 11,532 reminds us that in salt is prevention and cure, so people would seek that. Certainly they say we need iodine and some other minerals and stuff, so yeah. 11,537 talks about sprinkling a little salt on the first morsel of food. 11,589 talks about how the elderly should stay away from ghee, and that a person can eat the bread soup But if you're losing your teeth and such, you still seek refuge in God, and what happens, happens, but focus on taking care of yourself rather than worrying. $11,663 remarks of how Noah, knew, was upset when he saw the dead and such after, the local flood that was experienced. And he was said, you prayed against them, and he was told to eat the ripe dates. He's directed towards some ripe dates, and he not ripe dates, ripe grapes, and he consumed them, and that comforted him. As I record this video, it's the time of ripe grapes around here. They're harder to find because animals get them, but 11,689 mentions using pomegranate smoke to dispel vermin. Now, if they didn't cut down my pomegranate tree, I might have saved some of the, if there's pruning that you need to do, I'm not sure about that. I'd have to check. If there's, well, in general, if there's some dying off, you prune the weak to keep the strong growing, that sort of stuff, so you might want to save that. There are other plants that can drive away vermin, but I guess the smoke, more common. 11,821 mentions cypress as something rubbed on teeth. And certain things can be good for using as a toothpick, certain things not. Sawak and cypress are, and cedar are of plants that are included as stuff that's good. Maybe, some stuff could harm your gums or your teeth or something, so you don't use that. 11,836 reminds us not to excessively consume water. We're told to leave some space for air or something. 11,855 says that Satan drinks or takes part in the drinking from the handle or the broken part of a dish or cup. So, from the other side, or if it's broken. Certainly like some issues with the glazing or something that don't occur if the dish isn't broken. So yeah, this is something we don't take part in. 11,858 is that certain pottery bowls of Egypt aren't to be eaten out of. We do find that some pottery had blood or lead or hair or something, and the Sunni tradition forbids some of this pottery and stuff too. Well, certain hair, whatever. And you don't wash your head with that particular type of clay. So it's very particular to that type of clay, apparently. 11,861 talks about how the best water in the world is the Zamzam water, and the worst water is the water of Barhut of Hadramaut, on which wandering disbelievers roam. And, this has been confirmed about the Zamzam water. It's not, the Zamzam water is extremely rich and varied in terms of its nutrients. So it's like almost white. And sweet. And over the years it's got less, well, it's being extracted more, you could say, nowadays, but it doesn't have the strength that it used to. In volume too. 11,882 the Zamzam waters in Mecca, warns about the Tigris and the Canal of Balkh, and encourages towards the Euphrates and Nile of Egypt. Now, maybe the word here is used for other areas, so they wanted to make sure that Egypt was mentioned. 11,900 talks about how the person who quits consuming drugs for the sake of God, that they'll be made to drink of a sealed special drink. Well, I mean, they'll be presented it. But those who give alcohol and such to pre-adolescents are people who are mentally incompetent in that respect. They'll be made to drink of the boiling, the face roasting, liquid. 11,904 says that the person who consumes intoxicants, believing them to be permissible, well, that's, that's a long abiding in hell. But the person who believes that what they did was wrong and does it anyways, those are people who will get punished, so it's a lesser degree. 11,966 reminds us that wine, and we could say other things, aren't forbidden because of their name. It's, because of what it does. And anything that works like wine, even if it's psychiatric medication or something, or... Now, if people need something to survive, the doctors have given you advice and why something is the case, then, you should figure that they know. But what is their reasoning, of course? Certainly regard the medical thing, but alcohol and tobacco obviously are not considered medications. So certain other drugs are not considered medications. Back in the day, the people used to be prescribed whiskey, but, 11,976 reminds us when it comes to things that are like alcohol and stuff like this, if something that's unlawful is put in it, then it's not lawful. You don't mix the sinful stuff with the medication. Now, that's typically not our